All right, let's do a quick review of the events of our map in the Cold War in Europe. Let's start with the Iron Curtain speech. In 1946, the Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II, his name was Winston Churchill, comes to the United States, specifically Fulton College here in Missouri, and gives a speech where he makes a prediction. He says, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, he sees an Iron Curtain falling. And his prediction is that along that line, the Europe that we know will be Western versus Eastern. And we can see in our color-coded map that it really does end up looking like that. Then in 1947, the Truman Doctrine is established. President Truman gives a speech that is about giving aid to countries in need. Anywhere that free people are being oppressed by their government, it is our duty as Americans to support them. If we don't support them, Truman said, then we ourselves are at risk. And this is a pretty intense step that the United States is taking. It's a promise that we're giving to the world that we will be there to protect them. And so this again has played out in different ways since 1947, but in specific terms, Greece and Turkey were given $400 million to help them rebuild and to try and prevent them from gaining assistance somewhere else. We also have two different things going on. After World War II, many countries needed economic assistance, and the Marshall Plan was the United States version of providing economic assistance. So I created a symbol with $3 and was the intent to represent the red, white, and blue for the United States because the money that was loaned was from the United States and it was supposed to be used to purchase American products in the rebuilding process. So you'll see that the countries with this symbol all are on the Western side. So these were the countries that accepted money from the United States and used that money to help them rebuild. Again, with the idea being that they would then support the United States in any future conflicts. The Soviet Union was invited to participate, but they chose not to. They didn't want the strings of having to purchase American products. And so they decided to have their own plan and their own economic assistance plan as indicated by this symbol for the Russian currency. And they chose to then rebuild their own countries with their own economic assistance plan. So you have money going into Europe to help rebuild after the devastation of World War II. Remember that people are homeless, buildings are destroyed, factories are destroyed, people don't have jobs, and so there's a lot of money that's needed to help rebuild. In addition to rebuilding, then you also need the idea of security. And so when the Soviets get access to the atomic bomb in 1949, this creates a very scary situation in the world. And people are now afraid that there's going to be a battle between the two opposing sides of the Cold War for who is going to have the most nuclear power. And so remember that nuclear power is the strongest power that we have and the most destructive power. And so to have access to that is quite a bit more scary than just tanks, bombs, and your traditional military. So that becomes quite a need for more protection. So the Western nations sign a treaty called NATO, and it is an acronym that stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization, because here we are on the Atlantic Ocean, and since the United States is not technically in Europe, it is across the Atlantic Ocean, but it is along the coast of the North Atlantic. Then we also united with these nations that are shaded in blue to make a military agreement that an attack on one is an attack on all, and they will come to the defense of each other in any military situation. Well, obviously, if you have a military alliance on the western side, it would be a benefit for there to be a military alliance on the eastern side. And their plan was designed in a city called Warsaw in Poland. And in that city, they created the treaty that would then connect these Warsaw Pact nations. We have our first potential military conflict in 1948 with the Berlin Blockade. So as West Germany becomes independent and as they begin to develop a new currency, remember that at this point West Germany and East Germany have become separate nations, that the East Germans are afraid of, a potential fleeing of people, so they temporarily block all road and rail access into the city. Eventually, they also shut off the electricity. So what this does is it basically traps the people of West Berlin without access to food, water, medical care. And this was a turning point in the early stages of the Cold War because the Western powers could have easily walked away from the situation and said that they were going to then abandon the people in West Berlin to become a part of East Germany. They could have also decided to take military action, which could have led to a much more intense situation, and no one wanted more battles after just nearing the end of World War II. So the plan is the Berlin Airlift, and it's quite an ingenious plan to get supplies and medical materials, food, water, into the city by flying planes over Berlin 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and basically to say to the Soviets, we'll keep this up for as long as we need to, we'll call your bluff. And they do bring in supplies. You have this sample photo of school children who are out on a day from class watching an American plane fly over and again bring supplies that are desperately needed for the people of West Berlin. The stalemate does pay off in the West's favor, and eventually the Soviets do remove the blockade. We do have, in 1956, an example of some countries, the country of Hungary in particular, deciding that they are ready for more freedom, that their experience of communism has not paid off in the way that they initially would have liked, and that they would like to have more freedom from their government. So there's protesters, there's marches, and the response from Nikita Khrushchev is to send in Warsaw Pact troops and tanks and to regain control of Hungary. So in 1956, there is an invasion of Hungary, and any of the protests and rebellions are quickly shut down. Therefore, proving the brutality of disagreeing with the communist forces. Then in 1961, we have the Berlin Wall, because remember that, again, with open access and transportation, thousands and thousands of people are fleeing from East Germany and even from other Eastern Europe countries, because if they can get into West Berlin, then they can potentially escape and get out into any of the rest of the free West. And so to prevent more and more and more people from abandoning their countries, the East German government builds a permanent wall around West Berlin. And again, this is the wall that we've seen in the videos and is similar to the East German wall that you saw in the Cosmosphere, which came from around here. And so again, this permanent wall was meant to try and prevent people from escaping, and was in place with approximately 200 people who were killed trying to escape, and thousands more who were imprisoned. And then also some pretty amazing escape stories of people who were able to get over, under, or through the wall in various means over the years. The wall does come down in 1989 under the leadership of and influence of President Ronald Reagan in the United States and Mikhail Gorbachev in the Soviet Union. The final piece on your timeline is the invasion of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia is another country that is under a communist government. Their president, Andrej Dubček, does try to make some changes to instigate more freedoms and break away from the communist government. But again, troops, tanks, weapons, military power is sent in, and all protests and attempts to change the government are crushed. These are the events that you had on your Cold War timeline. I wanted to point out a couple other events that you know about, but that aren't necessarily here. Remember that we have the launching of Sputnik. So this was the opportunity for the Soviet Union to outshine the United States in their space attempt to get to the moon and out into space. And we oftentimes associate that space race with the Cold War. Again, it was an attempt to see which country was the best. The Soviets, remember, were also successful in having the first animal spaceflight with Laika, and then also to have the first successful humans in space with Yuri Gagarin. So the United States had some catching up to do, and we do eventually make it in 1969 to be the first humans to actually land on the moon. And so we do consider ourselves to be the winners of that space race, as there have not been any other countries to get to the moon. And we also consider ourselves to be the winners of the Cold War, because the Soviet Union does eventually disband in the 1990s, and the individual countries that you are studying on your map, like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, those countries begin to gain their independence. One of the things that you may also have noticed about your map is the idea that Czechoslovakia was one country, and now presently that has been divided into two, and that Yugoslavia was a country that existed for a long time, and this country has also gone through a lot of radical change in the last few decades and been divided now into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 7 different countries. Macedonia, Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, Slovenia, and we'll also talk more about what's called the Balkanization of Europe, and where some countries are joining together to become stronger, other countries are splintering apart for a variety of reasons. Again, hopefully this has helped you review all of those important events in Europe during the Cold War. And if you have any questions, you can always give me a call or send me an email. Thanks.